Hey guys, it's Lachlan here, and this is Lachlan Likes a Thing, a show where I take a thing and see whether or not I like it. Now, the thing we're looking at in this video is the Yamaha HPH-MT120 studio monitoring headphones. Now, this is a headphone that I got completely out of curiosity. I couldn't find much information at all about these headphones, but I did see them on sale at Dick Smith for $125, so I picked up a pair of these a while ago. And these headphones have a recommended retail price of $180, which puts them in the kind of studio monitoring space competing against the things like the Audio-Technica HPH-MT120 or the Shure SRH-840. This is, I think, a new line of studio monitors from Yamaha, and there's also a bigger brother of this headphone, the Yamaha MT220. I haven't had a chance to hear that, but apparently it's pretty good. So let's take a closer look. So you can see that Yamaha is doing something a bit interesting with the design of this headphone. You have this two-tone black and white plastic, which kind of reminds me of their pianos. You have these big squared off ear cups and this very wide chunky headband here. And one of the first things you'll notice when you pick up this headphone is that it's actually a very lightweight headphone for its size. I mean, this is a big studio monitoring headphone with big ear cups, but it only weighs 242 grams. Now, on Yamaha's website, this is listed at 320 grams, but they weighed it with the cable, and you know, that's basically, no one else does that in the industry. The weight of this headphone without the cable, I measured at 240 grams, which is lighter than the Audio-Technica HPH-MT120, which is 290 grams, and even lighter than the Sony ZX700, which is already a lightweight studio monitor at 250 grams. So at 240 grams for a headphone of this size, that's really quite remarkable. And how Yamaha appears to have achieved this is basically by going for as lightweight plastic parts as possible. And that means that even on some parts of the headband, there's actually no fill on the plastic. It's completely hollow. Now, while this makes for a lightweight headphone, the result is that in some parts, the Yamaha MT120 feels a little plasticky and a little cheap, and especially around this headband with this exposed cabling and, you know, this mechanism here, it just feels a little bit lightweight. That said, the Yamaha MT120 certainly doesn't feel like it's gonna fall apart. It's a relatively solid feeling headphone, so I have no real concerns there. Now, what I do have a big concern with the MT120 is the cable, because the cable on the MT120 is the worst cable that I have ever encountered on a headphone. And I haven't just deliberately tangled up this cable just for this video, just to show you, you know, kind of emphasize this point. This cable, as soon as I put it down or I try to straighten it out, it instantly coils up into this tangled shape, which is what it came with out of the box. And since that time, it has never lost the memory in the rubber. And quite honestly, and I don't normally use this kind of strong language, but this cable is garbage. And honestly, I have no idea how this passed product testing for Yamaha, because you could tell immediately that this would be an endless source of frustration to anyone who wanted to use this headphone in a studio, to have to uncoil this. Even if you try and coil it, I cannot even coil, because it just sticks together, and it's just awful. Honestly, I could go on and on about this all day. If you try to coil up this cable, what happens is that basically the kinks remain in the cable, so that if I do this with a cable, right, and I let go, instantly, you see, instantly it turns into this shape. I did not make this up. This is an awful cable. And as you can tell, it's awful enough for me to actually declare this a deal breaker for the MT120. But if you're still interested, let's have a look at the rest of the headphone. As far as comfort goes, you can tell that the ear cups are quite large and they have this big open space for your ears, and the ear pads are relatively soft, but they are relatively flat, which means that when you actually put them on your ears, you can actually feel that the tip of your ears, or at least my ears, will touch the inside of the driver of this headphone. Now, that's not terrible, but after a few hours, I can imagine that that will become irritating. The headphone itself is quite comfortable because of the light weight, and it doesn't have a particularly strong clamping force. And as you can see here, it sits relatively securely on the head. Noise isolation is about average, but honestly, obviously you're not going to take this headphone out onto the street. This is a studio monitoring headphone, and you're going to use it at home where this awful cable will torment you to no end. So let's move on to the sound of the MT120. And you may have just noticed that it appears to be magically a different time of day. And the reason for that is that this is actually the second time I've attempted to record my impressions of the sound of this headphone. And the reason for that is that it's slightly hard to describe. This headphone, normally with a studio monitor, what you want is a sound that doesn't emphasize the bass or the treble too much, because you want a generally accurate kind of representation of the sound. With the MT120, I think Yamaha has gone a bit too far the other way, in that they've made a headphone which is relatively neutral, but it underemphasizes the bass and it underemphasizes the treble, and what you're left with is this kind of mid-band emphasis in the middle with the vocals that makes the vocal range in particular very forward compared to the bass and the treble. And the result is that at low volumes, you can hear the kind of vocals quite clearly, and it's quite easy to listen to. But because you can't really hear the bass notes or the treble as well, you do miss out on a sense of definition in the beats of the track and the some of the spatial information that comes from the treble. And at high volumes, the actual vocals themselves become too aggressive, they become too forward. And this is quite interesting as a vocal signature, because compared to the Audio-Technica M50 and the Sony ZX700, which are the two studio monitors I have on hand, those headphones have a lot more kind of mid-bass warmth. Whereas the MT120, I wouldn't say that it's a terrible sounding headphone, but it has a signature where the vocals are forward enough in the mix that it actually sounds a little unnatural to me. It actually sounds somewhat rubbery and even a little dull, because you don't get a sense of that visceral slam from the bass or the kind of definition from the treble. And I have heard headphones that sound quite similar to this. I mean, I've heard quite a number of AKG headphones that have this kind of mid-forward signature, and that's why it's not really my preferred signature in terms of sound, but I do know that some people really like the AKG 701, for instance. Now, it might seem like I really don't like this headphone, and there's lots of things that I don't like about it, not the least of which is the signature. It's also the cable. But oddly enough, this headphone does make me really curious about the Yamaha MT220, because I feel like Yamaha has done a good enough job where they've gotten enough right with this headphone in terms of making a comfortable, lightweight studio monitor that I'd be really curious about all the little tweaks that they've made with the MT20 to improve upon this model. And from the kind of descriptions I've read, apparently it's quite good. So I'm very, very interested in getting my hands on a pair of those. But for now, I think this MT120 I'm going to have to put back in the box. If you are a studio engineer and you have some opinions on what studio monitors should sound like, I would love to hear them in the comments. I only really use studio monitors to do occasional monitoring for vocals for videos, and especially these videos basically. So I would be really interested to hear even if you use the MT120 or the MT220 for monitoring. I'd be really curious to hear what you think of these headphones. Anyway, for the rest of you and for my regular subscribers, thanks. I'm looking forward to your comments, and click the like button if you found this video helpful. You can talk to me on Facebook at facebook.com/LachlanLikesAthing or on Twitter at LachLikesAthing. Happy listening.